I think I didn't do anything wrong. Just took a chance to feel wanted again when his best friend asked me to move in. But now, after getting served those legal papers in front of my own family, everyone looks at me like I'm the monster, when all I wanted was to be happy. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. Let me start from the beginning, because I need you to understand how I got here. My name is Aurelia, and 6 months ago I was living what I thought was a perfectly normal life, with my husband Malcolm and our 6-year-old daughter Emma. We had our suburban townhouse, our routines, our weekend family dinners. But underneath all that normalcy, I was drowning. Malcolm had become this cold, distant stranger who cared more about spreadsheets than his own wife. He'd come home from his accounting job, barely kiss me hello, and immediately dive into bills or work emails. When I tried to talk to him about my day, about my feelings, about anything really, he'd give me these distracted nods while typing on his laptop. Even Emma seemed to sense it. She'd draw these pictures of Daddy at his computer and Mommy by herself. It broke my heart. I work as an administrative assistant at a small insurance office. Nothing glamorous, but it pays the bills. That's where I met Jasper Hale, Malcolm's best friend since college. He'd started coming by the office more frequently, ostensibly to grab lunch with Malcolm or drop off documents. But he always made time to chat with me. Unlike my husband, Jasper actually listened when I spoke. He'd ask about my day, remember details from previous conversations, and make me laugh with his easy charm. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in March. I'd had a particularly stressful day dealing with difficult clients, and I was looking forward to just unwinding with my family. But when I got home, Malcolm was hunched over the kitchen table with papers spread everywhere, muttering about quarterly reports. Emma was tugging at his sleeve, trying to show him a drawing she'd made at school. "Daddy, look, I drew our house with flowers." "That's nice, honey," Malcolm said without even glancing up. "Daddy's busy right now." Emma's face fell, and something inside me snapped. "Malcolm, she's been working on that all afternoon. The least you could do is look at it." He finally raised his eyes, and I could see the exhaustion there, but I was beyond caring. "Aurelia, I have 3 client presentations tomorrow, and the mortgage payment is due. I'm doing this for our family." "You're always doing something for our family, but never actually with our family," I shot back. Emma quietly slipped away to her room, clutching her ignored drawing. That night, after Malcolm had fallen asleep at his laptop again, I called my mother Beatrice. She listened patiently as I poured out my frustrations. "Honey, you deserve better than this," she said in that warm, validating voice I desperately needed to hear. "Malcolm has always been too focused on work. Even when you were dating, I worried he'd never prioritize you properly." I also vented to my younger sister Sophie, though her response was more measured. "Maybe he's just going through a rough patch at work. You know how he gets when he's stressed." But I didn't want to hear excuses anymore. I wanted someone to acknowledge that I was being neglected, that my feelings mattered. The next day at work, Jasper stopped by during my lunch break. He found me eating a sad desk salad and immediately suggested we grab coffee at the cafe across the street. As we sat in the sunny window booth, he listened intently while I shared my frustrations about feeling invisible in my own home. "You know what your problem is, Aurelia?" Jasper said, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "You're too good for someone who doesn't appreciate you. Any man would be lucky to have you notice them, let alone come home to you every night." The words hit me like warm sunlight after a long winter. When was the last time Malcolm had made me feel appreciated? When was the last time he'd really seen me? "Sometimes I wonder what it would be like," I found myself saying, "to live with someone who actually notices when I walk into a room." Jasper's eyes sparkled with something I couldn't quite identify. "Have you ever thought about it seriously? Living with someone who actually values you?" That evening, as Malcolm worked late again and Emma watched cartoons, I found myself texting Jasper. Maybe I should. I didn't specify what I was referring to, but somehow I knew he'd understand. When Malcolm finally came to bed around midnight, he glanced at my phone on the nightstand, its screen still glowing with notifications. But true to form, he said nothing. Over the next few weeks, my friendship with Jasper deepened into something more intoxicating. He'd text me throughout the day. Funny observations, sweet compliments, questions about my thoughts and feelings. It was everything my marriage had stopped being. Working late again tonight, I told Malcolm one Thursday, which wasn't entirely a lie. I did stay at the office until 6, but then I went to Jasper's apartment. His place was the opposite of our family home. Sleek, minimalist, with expensive furniture and no toys scattered around. He cooked me dinner, something Malcolm hadn't done in years, and we talked for hours about everything and nothing. When he kissed me, I felt like I was waking up from a long sleep. I should go, I whispered, but I didn't move away. Should you? Jasper murmured against my ear. When's the last time you did something just because you wanted to? I stayed until almost midnight, texting Malcolm that I was having drinks with coworkers. When I finally got home, he was waiting up in the living room. Long day? He asked quietly. You know how it is, I said, not meeting his eyes. Sometimes we have to put in extra hours. But Malcolm's expression was different, more alert, more focused than I'd seen him in months. Aurelia, is everything okay? You've been working late a lot recently. And there it was, the controlling behavior I'd been expecting. I can't win with you, can I? You ignore me when I'm home, and now you're suspicious when I'm working hard to contribute to this family. Malcolm flinched like I'd slapped him. I'm not suspicious. I'm concerned. About us. Well, maybe if you'd shown some concern before I had to find validation elsewhere, we wouldn't be having this conversation, I snapped, immediately regretting how revealing that sounded. What do you mean, elsewhere? Malcolm's voice was very quiet. I mean at work, Malcolm, with my colleagues, people who actually listen when I speak. I stormed upstairs, leaving him standing alone in our living room. The next morning, I called my mother while getting ready for work. He's getting paranoid, I told her, questioning my every move, making me feel like a prisoner in my own home. Oh, honey, that's not healthy, Beatrice said immediately. That kind of obsessive behavior, maybe Malcolm needs professional help. I also confided in Sophie, though I was more careful about what I shared. He's just been so controlling lately, questioning where I am, who I'm with. That doesn't sound like Malcolm, Sophie said slowly. Are you sure he's not just worried about you? You have seemed different lately. But I didn't want to examine why I seemed different. I wanted to focus on how Malcolm's newfound attention felt suffocating rather than caring. At work, Jasper and I had fallen into an easy rhythm of stolen moments and lingering touches. During one particularly flirtatious conversation, he mentioned that his roommate was moving out. I'm going to have to find someone new, he said with a grin. Know anyone who might be interested in living with someone who'd actually appreciate having them around? I laughed, but my heart was racing. Maybe I'll take you up on that offer. It felt like a joke, but we both knew it wasn't entirely. That night, Malcolm was going through our phone bill when I came downstairs for water. I watched him frown at the pages, his finger tracing certain numbers. Aurelia, he called softly. Can you come here for a minute? But I was already heading back upstairs. I'm tired, Malcolm. Whatever it is can wait until morning. I didn't see the look of devastation that crossed his face as I walked away. By May, the tension in our house had become unbearable. Malcolm had grown quieter, more watchful, while I felt increasingly justified in my secret relationship with Jasper. Emma seemed to sense something was wrong. She'd started having nightmares and asking why Daddy looked so sad all the time. The monthly family brunch at our usual cafe had become a dreaded obligation, but I decided to use it as an opportunity to take control of the narrative. I was tired of sneaking around, tired of pretending everything was fine. I deserved to be happy, and if Malcolm couldn't provide that happiness, someone else would. I arrived early and chose a table near the window, where everyone could see us. My mother Beatrice was first to arrive, immediately wrapping me in a supportive hug. "You look radiant, dear," she said, and I did feel radiant. Jasper's attention had given me a glow I'd forgotten I could have. Sophie arrived next with her usual cautious smile, followed by Malcolm's parents, Norma and Dale. Norma had always been protective of her son, but she tried to maintain a cordial relationship with me for Emma's sake. Dale, ever the peacekeeper, kissed my cheek and asked about work. "Actually," I said, deciding this was the perfect moment, "I have some news to share with everyone." Emma was coloring quietly beside me, her little legs swinging under the chair. I'd planned to have this conversation without her present, but Malcolm was running late as usual. "I've decided to make some changes in my life," I announced. "I'm going to be moving out of the house." The silence was immediate and heavy. Norma's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. "Moving out?" Dale asked carefully. "Aurelia, what's going on?" "I've been offered a better situation," I said, feeling empowered by their shocked attention. "Someone who actually appreciates me has asked me to move in with them." Beatrice reached over and squeezed my hand. "Oh, honey, I'm so proud of you for putting yourself first." But Sophie was frowning. "Aurelia, what about Emma? What about your marriage?" "My marriage has been over for a long time," I said firmly. "Malcolm is emotionally unavailable, possibly even abusive in his neglect. I can't sacrifice my happiness indefinitely." That's when Malcolm appeared in the cafe doorway. He looked terrible, thinner than usual, with dark circles under his eyes. But his expression was calm, controlled, as he approached our table. "Sorry I'm late," he said quietly, kissing Emma's head. "Traffic was bad." The awkward silence stretched until Norma couldn't contain herself anymore. "Malcolm, Aurelia was just telling us about her plans." Malcolm's eyes met mine across the table. "Were you?" "I was explaining that your best friend offered me a better life," I said, lifting my chin defiantly. "And I've decided to accept." The color drained from Malcolm's face, but he didn't explode or make a scene like I'd expected. Instead, he just nodded slowly. "I see," he said. "And when did Jasper make this offer?" "It's been developing over time," I said. "Some people know how to make a woman feel valued." Emma looked up from her coloring book, sensing the tension. "Mummy, why is everyone sad?" Before I could answer, Jasper himself walked into the cafe. I'd texted him to come pick me up, wanting to make a statement about my new life. But as he approached our table and saw all the stricken faces, his confident smile faltered. "Hey, everyone," he said awkwardly. "Aurelia, you ready to go?" Malcolm stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. Without a word, he pulled out his phone and took several photos. Of Jasper and me together, of Jasper's hand on my shoulder, of the shocked faces around the table. "Malcolm, what are you doing?" I demanded. "Documenting," he said simply. Then he leaned down and kissed Emma's forehead. "Daddy has to go, sweetheart. Be good for Mommy." As he walked away, I felt a flicker of unease. This wasn't how I'd imagined this scene playing out. Malcolm was supposed to fight for me, to realize what he was losing. Instead, he seemed to be planning something. Norma was staring at me with undisguised disgust. "With his best friend, Aurelia? Really?" "You don't understand the situation," I said defensively. "Malcolm drove me to this with his emotional neglect." But even Sophie was looking at me strangely now. "Aurelia, this is Jasper. Malcolm's friend since college. How long has this been going on?" I grabbed my purse and Emma's hand. "Come on, sweetheart. Let's go." As Jasper and I left the cafe with Emma trailing confused behind us, I didn't see Dale putting his arm around his sobbing wife or Sophie shaking her head in disbelief. I was too focused on the future I was creating for myself. Moving in with Jasper felt like stepping into a different life. His apartment was sophisticated and adult in a way our family home had never been. For the first few days, I felt like I was on vacation from my real life, but reality started creeping in quickly. Emma cried every night, asking when she could see Daddy. Jasper, who'd been charming and attentive during our secret affair, seemed less enthusiastic about the day-to-day realities of living with a woman and her child. Maybe Emma should stay with Malcolm during the week, he suggested after a particularly difficult bedtime. You know, for stability, school and all that. I agreed, telling myself it was for Emma's benefit, but really I was relieved. Playing house with Jasper was more fun without the complications of actual parenting. Malcolm had changed all the locks on our house and frozen our joint bank accounts. When I called to confront him, he didn't answer. When I texted, he responded only with information about Emma's schedule or school events. It was infuriating and somehow more hurtful than if he'd been angry. I decided to take control of the narrative on social media. I posted carefully crafted messages about new beginnings and choosing happiness. I shared quotes about leaving toxic relationships and finding your worth. The response was gratifying. Dozens of supportive comments from friends who didn't know the whole story. "So proud of you for choosing yourself," wrote my friend Jessica. "You deserve all the happiness in the world," added my cousin Marie. But there were other responses too. Some mutual friends seemed to be taking Malcolm's side, though he wasn't posting anything publicly. I noticed several people had unfriended me, including some of Malcolm's family members. When I called my mother for support, she was immediately sympathetic. "They're just jealous, honey. Some people can't handle it when others have the courage to pursue their dreams." Sophie's response was different. She called me directly instead of commenting online. "Aurelia, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Of course," I said, though something in her tone made me nervous. "How long were you seeing Jasper before you left Malcolm?" "Sophie, it's complicated." "How long?" she pressed. "It wasn't like that," I said defensively. "It developed naturally. Malcolm pushed me away and Jasper was there for me." "So you were having an affair?" The word hit me like a slap. It wasn't an affair. It was finding someone who actually cared about me. "While you were married to Malcolm," Sophie said quietly, "while you were living in his house, raising his daughter, letting him pay the bills. You don't understand. I understand that you cheated on your husband with his best friend and then humiliated him in public," Sophie said, her voice harder than I'd ever heard it. "What I don't understand is how you're making yourself the victim in this story." I hung up on her, shaking with anger and something that felt uncomfortably like shame. At work, things were getting complicated too. My boss, Mrs. Chen, called me into her office on a Friday afternoon. "Aurelia, I need to discuss some concerns that have been brought to my attention," she said, her expression serious. My stomach dropped. "What kind of concerns?" "About your relationship with Jasper Hale and how it might affect your work performance. I've received some documentation suggesting that your personal relationship may have impacted your professional responsibilities." "That's ridiculous," I said quickly. "My personal life has nothing to do with my job performance." But Mrs. Chen was already sliding a folder across her desk. "These are copies of your badge logs for the past 3 months, showing early departures that weren't reported as personal time. There are also security camera images of you leaving the building with Mr. Hale on multiple occasions when you'd reported staying late for work." I stared at the papers, my heart racing. How had Malcolm gotten access to this information? "I'll need you to provide a written explanation by Monday," Mrs. Chen continued. "And I want to be clear that any further discrepancies between your reported hours and your actual presence will result in disciplinary action." That night, I found a letter from a law office in my mailbox. My hands were shaking as I opened it. "Notice of intent to file for divorce and custody modification," I read aloud to Jasper, who was watching TV and barely listening. He said, not looking away from the screen. "Malcolm is threatening to divorce me," I said, my voice rising, "and he wants primary custody of Emma." Now Jasper looked at me, and I didn't like what I saw in his expression. "Well, you guys were going to get divorced anyway, right? This just makes it official." "But he's trying to take Emma away from me," I said, desperately needing him to understand the gravity of the situation. Jasper muted the TV and turned to face me fully. "Aurelia, maybe we should talk about what this all means. For us, I mean." Something cold settled in my stomach. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I didn't sign up for a custody battle and legal drama. This was supposed to be, I don't know, simpler." "Simpler?" I repeated, staring at him. "Look, you're great, and I care about you, but this is getting really complicated really fast. Maybe you should stay with your mom while you figure things out with Malcolm." The room seemed to tilt around me. This wasn't how any of this was supposed to go. Malcolm's lawyer, Patricia Morrison, had an office that screamed competence and success, floor-to-ceiling law books, diplomas from prestigious universities, and a mahogany desk that probably cost more than my car. I'd brought my own attorney, a young public defender named Kevin, who looked nervous in his ill-fitting suit. "Let's cut to the chase," Patricia said, opening a thick folder. "My client is seeking a divorce based on adultery and primary custody of the minor child based on abandonment and moral unfitness." "That's ridiculous," I said before Kevin could stop me. "I never abandoned Emma, and moral unfitness. I fell in love with someone who treated me better than my husband did." Patricia smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "Mrs. Vane, let's review the timeline, shall we?" She spread out a series of documents like she was dealing cards, phone records, workplace logs, security camera stills, even Emma's school attendance records. "March 15th, she began. "First documented phone call between you and Mr. Hale lasting over an hour, occurring at 11:30 p.m. while your husband was traveling for work." I felt Kevin shift uncomfortably beside me. "March 22nd, first documented instance of you leaving work early while reporting overtime hours. Security footage shows you departing with Mr. Hale." The papers kept coming. A timeline so detailed and methodical that it took my breath away. This wasn't the distracted, work-obsessed Malcolm I thought I knew. This was someone who'd been paying very close attention. "April 8th, hotel receipt charged to your personal credit card for a room you shared with Mr. Hale while your daughter was at a sleepover and your husband was home alone." "How did you get these?" I demanded. "Legal discovery, Mrs. Vane. Your husband has been documenting your behavior for quite some time." The timeline continued through dozens of lies, secret meetings, and calculated deceptions. Seeing it all laid out like this, I felt exposed and somehow smaller than when I'd walked into the room. "And finally," Patricia said, placing a stack of printed text messages on the table, "these are communications between you and Mr. Hale, obtained from your phone records, in which you discuss your husband in derogatory terms and plan your departure strategy." I recognized my own words, but they looked different in black and white legal documents. Cruel, calculated. Not at all like the desperate, lonely woman I'd felt like when I wrote them. Kevin cleared his throat. "While my client's marriage may have had problems, that doesn't justify this invasion of privacy." "There's no invasion of privacy in documenting adultery, Counselor," Patricia interrupted smoothly, "especially when it involves alienation of affection and potential harm to a minor child." "Emma is fine," I said desperately. "She's adjusting to the changes, but she's fine." Patricia opened another folder. "Emma's school counselor has documented behavioral changes including regression in academic performance, increased anxiety, and what she described as confusion about family structure. The child has been asking her teacher why Daddy is sad and when Mommy is coming home." My throat felt tight. Every divorce is hard on children. That doesn't mean I'm an unfit mother. "Perhaps not," Patricia conceded, "but abandoning the family home to cohabitate with your lover while leaving your child in limbo certainly raises questions about your priorities." That evening, I called my mother, desperate for the unconditional support she'd always provided. "Mum, they're trying to paint me as this terrible person. But you know that's not true. You know Malcolm drove me to this with his neglect. There was a longer pause than usual before Beatrice responded. Honey, I love you, but some of those documents, the timeline they showed you, it's hard to argue with dates and receipts. You're taking his side now too, I asked, my voice breaking. I'm not taking sides. I'm just saying maybe you could have handled things differently. Maybe you could have tried counseling before. Before Jasper. When I called Sophie, hoping for better support, her response was even worse. Aurelia, I saw the messages. What messages? Malcolm showed them to me. The ones where you called him pathetic and said Emma would be better off with a stepfather who actually cared about her. I'd forgotten about those texts. They'd been sent during a particularly frustrating argument with Jasper about Emma's presence in the apartment. I was angry, I said weakly. People say things they don't mean when they're angry. Do they? Sophie asked quietly. Because it sounded like you meant every word. That night, Jasper sat me down in his living room with the expression of someone about to deliver bad news. Aurelia, this legal stuff is getting really intense, he said, and I think maybe I wasn't ready for all the complications that come with this situation. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe you should find somewhere else to stay while you figure things out. This custody battle, the lawyers, the drama, it's not what I signed up for. I stared at him. This man I'd blown up my life for, and realized he was abandoning me just when I needed him most. So that's it? You're throwing me out? I'm not throwing you out. I'm just saying this got more serious than either of us expected, and I think we both need some space to figure out what we really want. The next morning, I received 2 more legal notices, a restraining order preventing me from entering the family home without supervision, and a formal custody hearing scheduled for the following month. I was staying in a cheap motel, alone, with my life in boxes, and my daughter asking why Mommy couldn't come home. The courthouse felt like a cathedral of judgment, all marble columns and echoing footsteps. I'd managed to scrape together money for a better lawyer, Sandra Mills, who specialized in family law, and had promised to fight for my rights as a mother. But as we sat at our table, reviewing my case one final time, I could see the doubt in Sandra's eyes. Aurelia, I have to be honest with you. The evidence against you is extensive and well documented. Your best bet is to show remorse, demonstrate that you're committed to Emma's well-being, and hope for joint custody. Joint custody? I said, my voice too loud in the formal space. She's my daughter. I carried her for 9 months. I've raised her for 6 years. And then you left her to move in with your lover, Sandra said bluntly. The court doesn't care about your biological connection if they believe you've demonstrated poor judgment that affects the child's welfare. Across the aisle, Malcolm sat with his legal team, looking composed and professional in his best suit. He'd lost weight, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 6 months ago, but he looked solid, reliable, like the kind of person a judge would trust with a child's future. Jasper was conspicuously absent from the courtroom, having made it clear that he wanted nothing to do with the legal proceedings. The man I'd destroyed my marriage for couldn't even be bothered to show up for moral support. When my name was called, I walked to the witness stand on unsteady legs. Judge Harrison was a stern-looking woman in her 60s who studied me over her reading glasses like I was a particularly disappointing case study. Mrs. Vane, she began, I've reviewed the extensive documentation provided by both parties. I'd like to hear, in your own words, your explanation for the events that led us here today. This was my chance. I'd practiced this speech, refined it, perfected it. I was going to explain how Malcolm's emotional neglect had driven me to seek comfort elsewhere, how I'd never meant to hurt anyone, how I deserved a chance to rebuild my relationship with Emma. Your Honor, I began, I want to start by saying that I love my daughter more than anything in the world, and everything I've done has been in pursuit of creating a better, happier life for both of us. Judge Harrison nodded for me to continue. My marriage to Malcolm had become emotionally barren. He was consumed with work, dismissive of my needs, and increasingly distant from both Emma and me. I felt invisible in my own home, unappreciated and unloved. I could see Malcolm's jaw tighten, but he didn't react otherwise. When I met someone who made me feel valued and appreciated, I admit I made some poor choices about how to handle the situation, but I was driven to those choices by years of emotional neglect and loneliness. Mrs. Vane, Judge Harrison interrupted, are you saying that your husband's work schedule justified adultery? I'm saying that people have emotional needs, and when those needs aren't met at home, sometimes they seek fulfillment elsewhere. And did you consider marriage counseling, separation, legal divorce before beginning a relationship with another man? I felt the first flutter of panic. The situation developed naturally. I didn't plan for it to happen. But you did plan to move in with Mr. Hale while still married to your husband. I planned to pursue happiness, I said, hearing how defensive I sounded. I planned to find someone who would treat me the way I deserved to be treated. Judge Harrison consulted her notes. And how did Emma factor into these plans for your happiness? Emma would have benefited from seeing her mother in a loving, supportive relationship instead of the cold, distant marriage she was witnessing. Mrs. Vane, according to the school counselor's report, Emma has exhibited significant behavioral regression since your departure from the family home. She's been asking her teacher when Mommy is coming home and why Daddy cries at night. How do you reconcile that with your belief that this situation benefits your daughter? The courtroom felt like it was closing in around me. Every divorce is difficult for children initially, but in the long run. Mrs. Vane, you're not divorced. You abandoned your family home to cohabitate with your lover, while your husband maintained the household and continued caring for your daughter. That's not divorce. That's desertion. I looked desperately at Sandra, who was scribbling notes and avoiding my eyes. Your Honor, I was in an emotionally abusive situation. Stop. Judge Harrison's voice cut through my explanation like a blade. Mrs. Vane, I've seen no evidence of abuse in this case. What I've seen is extensive documentation of calculated deception, adultery, and a pattern of behavior that prioritizes your personal gratification over your child's stability. The words hit me like physical blows. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. I was supposed to be understood, sympathized with, supported. The text messages between you and Mr. Hale show a callous disregard for your husband's feelings and your daughter's well-being. In one message, you refer to your husband as pathetic and suggest that Emma would be better off with a stepfather. Is that your testimony today? I was angry, I whispered. People say things they don't mean when they're emotional. Mrs. Vane, the court deals in actions, not emotions. Your actions show a pattern of deception that lasted months, a willingness to lie to your family, your employer, and apparently yourself about the nature of your behavior. I looked around the courtroom desperately. My mother sat in the gallery, her face pale and strained. Sophie was there too, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. Malcolm's parents flanked Emma, who was colouring quietly, oblivious to the proceedings that would determine her future. Based on the evidence presented, Judge Harrison continued, I'm awarding primary physical custody to Mr. Malcolm Vane, with supervised visitation rights for Mrs. Vane, pending completion of family counselling and a psychological evaluation. The gavel came down like thunder. As people filed out of the courtroom, I sat frozen at my table. Sandra was packing her briefcase, already mentally moving on to her next case. What happens now? I asked numbly. Now you comply with the court's orders and hope that over time you can demonstrate changed behaviour, she said matter-of-factly. The supervised visitation is actually generous, given the circumstances. I watched Malcolm kneel down to talk to Emma, his voice soft and reassuring, as he explained that Mommy would still see her, just differently for a while. Emma nodded solemnly, then ran to hug her grandparents. None of them looked at me as they left. Standing alone in the courthouse hallway, I pulled out my phone to call someone, anyone, who might offer comfort or support. But the screen lit up with a notification that made my blood freeze. another legal notice. Malcolm wasn't done with me yet. This one was for the divorce proceedings and financial separation. He was seeking to retain the family home, primary custody, and spousal support from me to help cover Emma's expenses during the transition. I sank onto a bench in the marble hallway, surrounded by the echoes of other people's legal battles, and finally understood the difference between consequences and punishment. Malcolm wasn't trying to destroy me out of spite or revenge. He was simply, methodically, legally protecting himself and our daughter from the chaos I'd created. And there was nothing I could do to stop him. The woman I'd been 6 months ago, the one who'd felt invisible and unappreciated, seemed like a stranger now. That woman had wanted to be seen, to be valued, to matter to someone. Now I was more visible than I'd ever wanted to be, documented and scrutinized and judged. I mattered to lawyers and judges and court-appointed counselors, but I'd lost the only audience that had ever really counted, my daughter, who was walking out of the courthouse holding her father's hand, no longer asking when Mommy was coming home. I think I didn't do anything wrong, just took a chance to feel wanted again when his best friend asked me to move in. But sitting alone in that courthouse hallway, with legal papers scattered around me like the debris of my former life, I finally understood that what I thought I deserved and what I'd actually earned were two very different things. And the law, unlike love, doesn't care about your feelings. It only cares about what you can prove. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.